Well, joining me now is Her Excellency Sarah Al-Amiri, who's Minister of State for Advanced Technology here in the UAE, and Esben Staerk, who is President of LEGO Education. Please join me on the stage as we spend a short period of time talking about rethinking learning for the next generation. Couldn't be better set up than Catilia's presentation to us. Thank you, guys. What did you think?
Wow. Catilia, I think, put together an excellent strategy by Alan T. I was sitting next to our Minister of Public Education. I said, that's it. We know what to do here.
You're done.
We're done.
Fantastic. We've just heard from a young talent aspiring to create a difference in the world we live in. And I'm sure we've all learned a thing or two from Catilia. Learning, of course, has dramatically changed in the last couple of years. We saw a change, and we talked about AI and education here. In the UAE, I remember when I first got here, 8, 9 years ago, we were having these early discussions about organizations that were involved, and it felt so out there at the time. I mean, clearly COVID has just accelerated so much of our learning. Yes. And given us an opportunity to consider how we support this generation going forward. Esben, you are president of LEGO Education. How has the pandemic altered the way we think about education?
Well, I think I think the pandemic itself, I think, has had some very positives around it. I think it has, for one thing, it has shown, I think, both the importance of the resilience and the ingenuity of teachers, by the way. I mean, how many teachers did not get, here's a standard solution to how we're going to solve this. Here's a Zoom link, please make it work. And I think that respect for the teacher and the agency that we can show teachers in the classroom and their ability to drive learning in the classroom, I think, is an important outcome of the pandemic.
By the way, to the teachers out there, it has been the most remarkable time, and also an extremely important time for faculty on their journey, I think, into the role of technology in development of talent and learning. Sarah, I'm fascinated to hear from you where you believe government can and will support policy that includes STEM, obviously, which is massively important to the UAE, but also the adoption of technology in the curricula and beyond.
So that's a broad sort of direction, especially when we're talking about the evolution of curricula and the utilization of technology as a tool for the delivery of education, and then the ability to convey the right curricula aspects that devises the importance of STEM across the board without forgetting the importance of other fields. So it's not about pushing the STEM agenda forward because this is important, but more of an understanding of the role of science and technology in our life. If you're not interested in STEM, then how do you utilize it as a tool? And that becomes the vital aspect for putting STEM forward. And perhaps the quote-unquote easiest way to do it is the utilization of programming and computers and robotics into the experience of education. And that is not STEM focused. You can use it in arts. You can use it in music. You can use it in philosophy. You can use it also in STEM fields. And that's perhaps the debate that we're currently having with regards to policies in education. And it's how do I use the right technologies for the experience factor and to enable teachers in the education process? How do I enhance the STEM education to provide the breadth of knowledge for those that are interested in STEM? And how do I continue fostering the utilization of science and technology as a tool? Because today in our lives, Becky, we don't live a day without technology. And if we don't have the full awareness, regardless of what field we fit in, if we don't have the full awareness on where and how to use these technologies, we won't be able to utilize it to its maximum capability.
How are you gaming the future at LEGO Education? And I think if I don't doubt that you will speak to much of what the minister has just been discussing here.
Well, I think you talked in one of the earlier sessions about gamification. I guess what we also try to do is playify. So how do you bring the principles of play into the classroom, because they're also consistent with really meaningful and engaging learning? Because when you think about it, what is play, or gaming for that matter, it's personally meaningful. It's actively engaging. You make choices, you create something as well. Cordelia, when he was talking about coding and why that excited him, I think it was not just learning the code, it was what he could create with it. It was the problem solving, it was the exploration that he could do. Learning is also iterative. It's not about the one solution, it's not the one right thing, but it's about making the best possible. So how do you start on that journey? How do you reflect? How do you learn? And through that, how do you learn that there's not one right solution, and that you build that confidence in your own learning and you learn on that? Then it's also hopefully socially interactive. So again, you work with others. There you also train vital skills such as communication, negotiation, compromise, really important elements there. And then lastly, it's joyful. And learning should be joyful. And I think we look to bring all those elements into the classroom. So that's how we're looking to playify learning. And I think when we do that, we also really ensure the legitimacy of the classroom. Because I think when we go back to the pandemic, and as you talked about, we've seen lots of digital tools that can help optimize knowledge acquisition. Basically taking the place of instruction. So then the classroom needs not to be about instruction, but about that engaging. And again, I think Cordelia, when he talked about it, he talked about being challenged, being directed, being guided. He didn't talk about being instructed. So I think it is building that purpose of the physical classroom that is there, but again, not through instruction, but through challenge and through exploration.
That's a really, really good point. I know that you're also an advocate of learning through play.
Yes.
I mean,
So I can speak to my personal experience on what enforced the learning through play personally. Very early on in the career, we used to do a lot of outreach activities with schools. One of the activities we did was a gamification. So it was a board on building a spacecraft, and it had all the different odds. It had all the different cards on what you can and can't do. And it's a very simple board game. What stood out to me is the choice, because the students were given a choice to think through the process of design, it amplified what they were learning in their technology design class. Because they knew exactly what were the questions that were asked. They knew the role of requirements. They built systems that failed, and they built systems that succeeded. And it was an hour session, but at the end of that, the level of excitement, and it was delivery of a class, but the level of excitement in the children that were part of this resounded with them years upon years, where some of them still come up when they see us completely by accident and remember it. We all know from experience at work that when we do things, we learn from it more than when we sit and someone's instructing us and providing us with information. It's the same with what we've had the aspect of utilizing the LEGO education toolkits in the education process. So what you're doing is just delivering in different mechanisms, and this is what education is all about today. You're delivering the same type of knowledge, but in so many different ways. And what that does, it does not only ensure a breadth of knowledge in students, it ensures that they have a grasp and therefore a vertical depth in knowledge. And that's very important. It's not about learning, for example, about the solar system in one way, but understanding how it intricately fills together. The role that it plays, that depth in knowledge is perhaps, even from my perspective, more important than the amount of knowledge that a child knows at the end of their education process.
Yeah, and I think, because I think what we're talking about is then ultimately building that lifelong love of learning, or that confidence in learning that one of your previous speakers talked about as well. And with the society as quickly as it's moving, and again, trying to predict what challenges will face current students in 10 or 20 years' time is pretty much impossible, right? And we can't offer them the solution to that problem. But we can offer them the tools for lifelong learning so that they can face challenges we don't yet know and solve those. And that's why I also think education is changing. We're not preparing for a particular something, but we're providing them also these set of skills and the lifelong love of learning.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you brought up the aspect of skills, because one of the skills that through gamification that you're able to build through the education process is the ability to learn and unlearn and relearn. And that's a very important aspect of the future skills that need to be imparted onto students, on top of the skills that you spoke about. They need to think critically, they need to solve problems. It's not about capturing knowledge. They need to capture knowledge and disseminate it in a particular way based on the experiences that they go to. That's spot on exactly what education needs to be today. We cannot predict where we're going down the line just by the speed that things are changing.
COVID-19 certainly highlighted inequalities that already exist. We're talking about they, we, we're talking about sort of in this conversation to a certain extent, assuming that there is opportunity and access for everyone, and we shouldn't do that. We should be sensible to address this and talk about how we bridge that information-rich, let's back out of that, technology-rich, technology-poor environment.
That needs to be in all of our agendas, especially countries that have access to technology. And the first means to do that is to reduce the cost of technology, especially technology that is going into schools. And the Emirates has several examples of doing that through the Mohammed Rashid initiatives, be it by having digital schools that are available to people that don't have access to it and providing them with the tablets to have access to schooling from the initiatives in Dubai Cares. But we need to also strive that technology companies that are developing those technologies are broadening the effort to reduce the cost and therefore increasing the access of technology. The second aspect that's very important, our children here and in the technology advanced world have access to a plethora of data and knowledge and information that a lot of children around the world don't have access to it. Not only because of not having access to devices, but not having access to the internet and basic connectivity. And that's where the role needs to continue happening with regards to access to connectivity. And we see that today with not only relying on ground-based networks, satellite networks are coming into play today. And the call here is to ensure that these satellite networks, especially for access to rural areas and areas that don't have technological advancements, are provided without a cost or with minimal cost. And it's through these intricate amalgamation of all these different access to communication are we able to do this. And this is something that no one country can do. But from our end, as an imperative, the education aspects and the education programs that come from the UAE, even as aid, need to have that technological aspect into it.
Sarah's taking this on from the perspective of government. I wonder whether you might just take that on from the perspective of the private sector. What can an organisation like yours do to bridge the gaps?
Well, LEGO Education, the LEGO Foundations, for instance, in the US worked with, for example, First Book and Intel to actually bring devices into a number of underserved schools across 17 states, but with it also bring hands-on learning kits as well, because it's not just about providing the computer and the internet. That's a prerequisite and that's a requirement. But then how do you then also engage students that maybe for a while have been disengaged? And that's where actually bringing some of those LEGO Education-based kits at home, where the students can then engage, by the way, get off the screen, do something, and then come back and then share in the class what have they created, communicate about it, look what have others done, etc. So that's an example there of how we've engaged in that.
7 minutes left, so I just want to spend the last part of this session talking about how we imagine what the learning environment then is going to be and reinforce what we've been discussing here. How are things going to change for my 2-year-old, Sarah?
As much as we talk about technology, the human element is still going to be the center of a classroom. But the mechanisms by which we deliver becomes different because you're catering to the individual skill sets that you need to develop in the children today. That's going to be the key driver and change, where you're able to address a breadth of students through the different learning methodologies that they take to be, and it will be skill-based education on top of knowledge and the utilization of knowledge.
And I just wonder how, it's fascinating listening to you, because I consider how government is set up here, and I consider how many of you as ministers have got kind of, a sort of multi-role at times. And Sarah, for those who don't know, is also head of the space program here. And as we've just been talking, so you have used some examples through your experience with different hats on in government. How important is that? Because this is a World Government Summit, and I think there's something to be taken from the way that government is set up here that may provide some opportunity or thought for people from elsewhere.
So one of the aspects that's very important, and that's spot on, Becky, because we're very closely related as ministers in terms of portfolios, and there's an intentional overlap. With this intentional overlap, indirectly you're creating an ecosystem between individual institutions to work together. And perhaps one of the councils that is not well versed, people are not well versed in it, is the Education and Human Resources Council.
The Education and
Human Resources Council. The Education Human Resources Council in the Emirates has ministers from all portfolios that can benefit education, and also has education in terms of the overall development that would benefit the other sectors. So not only do we have our ministers of education on it, we have our minister of youth to give the youth perspective on it, community development, culture, heads of universities, and the Ministry of Economy. And this provides a multifaceted approach to education. And we understand, so our Minister of Public Education is here. I understand the opportunities that exist today in the ministry to bridge programs between the institutions that I work with, and vice versa. And it's being able to have that insight into work in areas that are tangential to our portfolios that is very important in terms of driving it forward. And I'll not speak for her, but we've had many a conversation on how do we further education, how can we support in terms of even, for example, creating role models or setting the right direction, or in terms of foundational elements, not only the education aspects, and then we have a better understanding on what the outcomes of education is and how we can support and how the education sector can support in our development.
I've seen the real benefit of that overlap in government here, and I think it's a very smart way of going about things. You will speak to governments around the world, I'm sure, in the position that you have. Where have you seen success, and where have you seen sort of C-, as it were? You don't have to finger point at this point, but I'm just wondering, what you take out of your opportunity to speak to people around the world, and how do you believe the private sector fits in to the world of rethinking learning for the future generation?
Yes, so if we take the question first around how do we see it around the world, again, I think we see a difference in terms of exactly how much do governments embrace the idea of skill development. So the idea of skills in addition to knowledge or academics, as an example. And I think, for instance, here in this summit, having listened to quite a few speakers, things like creativity pops up. We're talking about both the knowledge and the skill-based society. That does require government to embrace that, because it's not as easily testable as knowledge-based skills, as an example. It requires, I think, also a higher degree of agency towards teachers going into that, and it requires a willingness to rethink the classroom. So governments that do that, governments that at the same time and at this current time continue to fund education, I think are the ones where we see bigger progress. And like I said, typically also the ones where there's a high degree of teacher agency in bringing these different models.
Second part of that question was how do you believe the future, what's the future of the private sector in rethinking the way our kids learn?
Well, I think we have an opportunity, and certainly at LEGO Education have an opportunity to be part of rethinking the classroom, bringing in the tools that support a playful approach to learning, that support the skill development, that support the dialogue around how do you then evaluate skills and bring those to the forefront. So that's where we have a substantial part of our focus. And I think maybe to your other question before, how will education then be different? Yes, I think skill focus will be a huge thing. I think lifelong learning, it will be a big thing. And how do we equip students for that desire to continue to learn? And then I do think we'll see, again, a mix of digital and physical tools, where I think digital tools can go in and play a role for a lot of the knowledge acquisition. Again, I think the problem solving, the engagement, the social collaborative learning, the classroom is perfect for that, but then we also need to rethink the classroom. And that's where we are in, and with both schools, districts, and in some cases governments, actually supporting that journey.
60 or 40 seconds, Sarah. Those 40 seconds are yours.
That's a tough one. It's overall, the classroom and the overall continuum skill development will be focused on a multifaceted approach, and it needs to be done by several sectors across the board. Second, the experience aspect and taking into consideration the skills that need to be developed in students is very important in various areas. And third, to put it out there, in terms of STEM, the utilization, understanding of the role of science technology as a tool is much more important than just pushing math and physics and biology as subjects.
I'm really pleased to hear you say that, because it's been very much in vogue. We're out there. What I think the enthusiasm for putting STEM at the top of the agenda has done has just, to my mind, and this is just an observation of living here, it's just broken any kind of taboos that young girls have about that as an opportunity. Now what you're saying is you don't have to push it, you know, it's not in your face, it's just out there. But I think the job's been done, because I don't, just from my own observations, I don't see kids as they're getting into grade 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't see girls deciding that this isn't for them at all. And so I think the job's been done as far as equality of opportunity here. It's been an absolute delight. Sarah and I speak regularly. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much indeed. I'll let you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.